Good morning. Had a interesting weekend, I guess. It wasn't bad. It was just I guess I did a lot of stuff. I did come to a few conclusions too. Speaking of conclusions, the tortoise is home now with his rightful owner, and tortoise sitting successful. And as you can hear, I have not yet changed my brake pads. Oh, man. We also had a church dedication service on Friday, so we've been building up to that for weeks. So all of that kind of crescendoed. Plus my neck is super stiff from having one. I don't know. I actually kind of did a bunch of tech this weekend. I rebuilt this Toshiba laptop whose hard drive died. Swapped it out with one of the ThinkPad drives that I had lying around after I changed it to an SSD. And I tried to get the old drive going. I tried to hook it back in. I tried everything except a caddy. And while that Toshiba was acting rather strangely as far as what it would and wouldn't boot, I was pretty satisfied that that hard drive was dead. The whole build was cheap anyway, so I don't know. I feel like I want to load it up with a flash memory or something, or make it like I don't know, like a small Linux system. Either way, I put the new hard drive in it, or the old hard drive, the working hard drive in it, and messed around with it for a bit. I wound up going with Linux Lite, which is a distribution that I rather like. It's just nice to see the old hardware revived. The kids came down while I was taking it apart, and they were asking a bunch of questions. So I took apart the small, the laptop hard drive, and harvested the sweet magnets within, and gave them to the kids to play around with. So they were having a lot of fun with that. Figuring out what is, I said what is metal, but what is ferrous, technically? That's be a bit more accurate. Being pedantically accurate, I was texting my brother-in-law after I got after I took the squirrel, and I told him that it tasted pretty good, and or I said I fed it, and Janelle tried it. Like, I wanted to feed my kids with it. He said, like, oh, what did she think of it, or something like that. I said she said she gave it 10 thumbs up, and I told her that was not an appropriate value range for that unit of measurement, and I sent her to her room. 10 thumbs up. No. Okay, whatever. Sorry. So that was the Toshiba. That thing's working now. The case is so empty on that thing. I feel like I want to just take it out of that flimsy. The case is really bad too. Everything feels super cheap on that thing. Probably because it was super cheap. I don't know. I had a number of instances where I needed a laptop before I knew that ThinkPads existed and were ridiculously good at the cost merely of aesthetics. I mean, like someone else's aesthetics, not mine. Mine are perfect. A cheap, good laptop that'll last a long time and is easy to repair and matches your aesthetics, your sensibilities. Sign me up. Yeah, I don't know if I'll buy another style of laptop. I mean, not the new Lenovo's, of course. I mean, come on. Right, so that was, yeah, okay, the Raspberry Pis. So I spent a bit of time messing around with the Raspberry Pis. I wanted to try some alternative installs, layouts. I put the Raspberry Pi Raspbian for the full Raspberry Pi on it, and was trying out some different stuff with the Zero. I just had a bunch of like half-baked Raspberry Pi projects, half-baked Raspberry Pi, and I started breaking them down and kind of mixing them up, and my conclusion was, I don't know that the Raspberry Pi tablet is there. Like, I'm getting weird voltages where if I plug in, and this might just be the cheap circuit, but I have the Raspberry Pi, it charges just fine, it runs off the battery just fine for hours, but I plug it in and it gets low voltage, which is to be expected, but once the battery finishes charging, it goes back to normal voltage. So I'm like, okay. And I did this several times the first day. I just unplugged the power. And again, for power, I'm using the official Cana kit, 2.1 milliamp or 2.1 amp wall wart. So no problems. I've actually tried a few, so it's not a problem with the wall wart. But when I unplug it, it gets low voltage and reboots. And after a series of experiments with this, I seem to have either damaged the Raspberry Pi or damaged the SD card. Oh, I probably should have. I don't know. Burning those SD cards takes a long time. So I don't know if like the SD card got a little bit wonky with all the rebooting, or if the Raspberry Pi is acting up, because I get seg faults, and I would have to reboot the Raspberry Pi like 10 times before it would come up correctly, and it would do different things each time it booted up. And I don't know. I guess I need to wipe a card, just redo it and see what it does. Because I did have a faulty Raspberry Pi Zero that I used for projects at this point. They didn't want it back. Obviously, it's like $5. I don't know, whatever. So they're like, just throw it away, and I'm like, I don't throw things away. They sent a replacement, and I have this other one that works kinda sometimes. So I use it in risky projects. Your risky projects, right? Who wants to risk losing $5? No, it's just consumerism, okay? Oh no, they made the computers disposable, man. They did it. You bastards, you blew it up. Oh man. Okay. No, seriously though. It's all disposable, man. It's all disposable. So the Raspberry Pi Zero is even even more finicky with its voltages. And the Raspberry Pi Zero, the problem I've mostly had with that is when you plug a USB host device into it, or a USB client device into it, a keyboard or something like that, depending on what that voltage draw is, or the amp draw, it'll brown out the Raspberry Pi Zero. So then you're like, well, shoot, like, the SD card didn't get properly shut down. I know it's supposed to be a problem. I haven't had a lot of problems. I shouldn't say that. I'm currently having problems, so I haven't really tested that. But that kind of tester one would get seg faults. It wouldn't do an APT update. It just acted weird. So I use that one. Like I said, I use that one for projects. But this one started getting seg faults, and usually, like, I've totally messed up the memory on some of these devices, or the SD cards, and they just don't boot. Like, the file system doesn't exist in any appreciable format. So that's usually what happens when the SD card gets, munted or something. Then, or the file system gets munted, and then you're like, okay, I get that, my bad. But usually not seg faults. So, kind of weird. Might be worth looking into, but the first, testing process is going to be get a fresh SD card, put on a fresh Raspbian, and start it up. So I'll do that when I get a chance and get going. To be frank, honestly, it's not honestly, it is just frankly, yeah. Frankly, the best experience I had over this weekend was picking up the X200, the ThinkPad X200 for like 20 minutes. I'm like, it's so compact and nice. That's my wife's laptop now. But was that and RetroPie on the Pi Zero. That system is so well developed, and you can just turn it on a Raspberry Pi W, plug it in somewhere, and forget about it. I'm also trying to figure out what, not just can the Raspberry Pi be the system, but what is the system I want the Raspberry Pi to be. So I'm experimenting with a slightly different task system. And when I say task system, I'm not buying something. I'm not using different pre-configured applications unless I mention that application name. I'm just introducing a new workflow, a new methodology for tracking this stuff. So this one makes it accessible from my website and written from an org mode page. And I'm thinking about, I don't care about having plain text, so there's very minimal formatting on it, which I like anyways. But my first thought is, okay, how do I get an org mode file I'll just write a processor that runs the org mode file through and turns it into HTML. That way, upon each request, the web server can execute that, that series of pipes to translate that file live into something that's HTML readable or browser readable or more browser friendly. So it's not a Emacs package yet, but just interested in messing around with this. I also have this is off the custom web server, so I will do with it as I please. I don't care. Like, hey Apache, how do I get you to do this weird thing? They're like, don't. Lol. Why don't you install Apache Perl or Apache PHP and then do it that way? I don't like Apache PHP. I don't like Apache Perl. More cruft. No, Apache's pretty. No, I'm not gonna say anything. That's fine. Apache is an excellent web server. So lots of tech this weekend. Kind of disappointing, but I don't know. I guess it doesn't always have to be appointing. If the system doesn't work, it doesn't work. And maybe this dragging I have on a Raspberry Pi tablet or integrating a Raspberry Pi into a keyboard is just distrust I have for the Raspberry Pi. At least in the cases I'm talking about, in the use cases where, power goes up and power comes down, and then we charge, and then we stop charging, Then we yank the charge, and we plug it in with low amps and, you know, all that stuff. I could probably test it out with the Power Boost 1000, and that thing has a whine on it like you wouldn't believe. But it's only when it's charging, and I don't know, it might not be that big of a deal. Yeah, so all that said, the Pocket Chip came out again, and I'm reminded of how good it is. I'm reminded of its strengths rather than its lacks. The things that it lacks. So again, I don't know what these systems are, but I'm just trying different stuff to see what these systems could be. I don't like that the Pocket Chip is, like, the last one died on me, like, legitimately. I thought I had, like, screwed up the file system. No, it won't even show up as a it won't even identify on USB in fail mode. So, like, the circuit board, something broke on it, and that's obviously disheartening to me. If I knew this Pocket Chip, maybe that's, you know, if I could gaze into the future and I could know that this Pocket Chip was going to work perfectly for the next 20 years, I'd be like, cool, done, you know, let's invest heavily into this. If it's hard to carry, we'll come up with carrying systems. If it doesn't have applications that I want, we'll write apps for it. Programs. We'll write programs for it. Something useful there. And then, you know, talking in the back is still, like, the possibility of a cell phone just doing most of this stuff anyways. An isolated cell phone. Yeah, like loading Lineage OS onto one of these devices. These Galaxy Note 4s are getting pretty inexpensive, and I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in those. Okay.